here to talk about representation, storytelling, and activism as it relates to my work making films, like she said, about transgender and gender-expansive youth, and using those films to promote inclusive communities so that those kids can feel welcomed. The first of three questions I want to ask during my talk today is why, of all the topics as a filmmaker and investigative journalist I could study and work on over the last 9 years, have I spent a lot of time working on transgender youth? Well, in 2006, I came across an article in the New York Times that was about what they were calling at the time children with gender dysphoria. And what that meant was children whose biological sex did not match their gender identity. And while this article was really fascinating, what really struck me was the photograph that came with the article, which depicted, as you see in the center of the picture, an 8-year-old biological male who was wearing a beautiful dress, flowing brown hair, running away from the lens with a teddy bear clutched under his arms. And as soon as I saw that picture, I was like, I have to make films about kids like this. I didn't really investigate why I felt so compelled to do it. I just did what filmmakers do. I got to work. I studied the topic. I found all the books that were coming out about it. There weren't too many at the time. And I contacted the fledgling organizations that were out there to serve kids like these. And soon enough, I found families and young people who are interested in having their stories told. So I started filming with a biological female named Annika. She was 12 at the time. And she was hitting up against puberty and getting really freaked out about it because she was gender non-binary. In other words, she didn't identify as a boy or a girl. So her caregivers put her on, her parents and her caregivers put her on Lupron, which delays puberty in a non-destructive way, so she had more time to decide what her gender identity was going to be as she got older. So this film was the first film in what became, after a few years, a series of short films called the Youth and Gender Media Project. That film was called I'm Just Annika, and that film showed in over 50 festivals, and it was very popular at the time because there was very, very little media out there about children who were gender non-binary. And so people really wanted to understand this story. Turn my page. So as I traveled around the country showing the film, I kept getting asked the same question, among other questions, which was, why are you a cisgendered straight guy? Do you know what cisgendered means? It's someone who's not trans, cisgendered straight guy. Why are you making films about trans youth? And beyond my fascination with the topic, I didn't really have a good answer to that question. And as I got asked it more and more, I realized I better investigate my own motivations so I can actually represent myself as a filmmaker that has a reason to make these films. And I wanted to be really honest about it. So that took me back to my childhood. I was a boy growing up in the early 70s. And at that time, gender was actually a big conversation in the public sphere. The women's movement had just started really making a huge impact. And my mom was subscribing to Ms. Magazine and was reading books like The Feminine Mystique. But the thing that really changed me and my sister was we got this record, I don't know if any of you remember this, called Free to Be You and Me. Yeah, you got it. So Free to Be You and Me was full of stories and skits about children who were breaking free of gender constrictions, which was so cool for us. And, but the other thing I remember when I went back was that I loved girly things. I loved like my sister's dresses and toys, and most of all, I loved her. Oh, I forgot to say that also at that time, there were a lot of celebrities breaking free from gender expression norms. And so they were a big inspiration for me, too, at the time. But my sister had this dollhouse. It was huge. And I loved playing with it more than anything else in the world. So I would go and play with it and bother my sister. And eventually, she got really annoyed with me and begged my parents to get me my own dollhouse. So they did. God bless them. They bought me one. But instead of a 12-plus room mansion filled with little chandeliers and upholstered furniture and little dinette sets, what I got was 4 rooms made out of plastic. And I definitely didn't have any little chandeliers in there. So I didn't actually play with my own dollhouse. I just kept playing with my sister's. But I did also love other toys. I loved Hot Wheels and building blocks. And my sister loved my toys, too. And we played together all the time. So my sister and I, like all children, don't understand that why shouldn't I be able to wear anything I want, play with anything I want? And we did that. But the place where I hit up against some real obstacles was at school. Because I was gender nonconforming, and kids tend to police each other around gender because of their own policing that happens in society, I got bullied terribly. I got beaten up. I was called sissy. I was called faggot. And it was really, really harsh. So I felt like the only way I was going to survive school is if I took that side of me and I just put it away and suppressed it. And I did that really well. I stopped wearing my colorful clothes. I stopped, actually it tampered down my natural flamboyance and energy. And eventually, after a couple years, I really forgot that I'd ever wanted to break free of gender norms. I played sports. I really towed the boyhood line. And the problem with that is that you suppress part of yourself. And after a few years, I just had this part of myself that went completely underground. But I did sort of have a part of myself that never, ever forgot. So as I show my films to audiences of college students and high school students, I will start with a question. I will say, can you remember a time when you were targeted for deviating from gender norms? And without exception, every single one of them has a story that's poignant and often heartbreaking, which means that all of us went through a childhood where we hit up against a time where we were trying to break free from gender norms, and we didn't have the resources or the allies to really fight back and hold on to that part of ourselves. And when we suppress that part of ourselves, it turns into, as adults, into rigidities in our thinking and biases. Like a typical example is, well, I didn't get to do that. The hell I'm going to let you do that. And we don't even think about it. We just have those natural responses. As adults, we do have the opportunity to go back and heal those things. We can tell those stories, we can grieve them, and we can talk to each other and free up our thinking again and become more flexible. And when I did this, what I finally understood was I wanted to be that boy in that picture. I wanted to run around wearing dresses on the street holding a teddy bear, and I didn't get to do that. And so my mission became the mission of the Youth and Gender Media Project, which is to make the world safe for kids like I was so they wouldn't get bullied. So that's what I've spent the next 9 years working on, among other things. And I also wanted to say that there's this idea that it gets better. And I realize that it does get better, but we need to work together to try and make it better now, so we don't have to do it gets better. And that brings me to the second question I wanted to answer, which is, why are these stories important? Well, as transgender liberation has become more visible, schools and states have been protecting gender identity as a class. So when those laws are actually enforced, which isn't that much, it's really a wonderful thing. But there's naturally been, unfortunately, a backlash where leaders and political activists have tried to portray gender nonconforming people and transgender people as predatory. And they're going to go into bathrooms and do predatory things. So that's a real problem. And this has led states like North Carolina and Alabama to try and pass laws that prohibit transgender people from using the bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. And it's not surprising that these are the same states that have a history of institutionalized racism where people of color and black people weren't allowed to use so-called white bathrooms. But it is interesting to note that at that time, when there were those separations, the white bathrooms were separated by gender, but the colored bathrooms were not. So these new culture wars have led to hundreds of hours of media coverage and political advertising that's attempted to reduce transgender liberation to a debate about bathroom usage. And that's really unfortunate because the narrative that's really happening, which is transgender people and gender nonconforming people experience violence and bias every day, actually in bathrooms and in every other public sphere, that story does not get covered. So that's a problem. So I'm going to read some statistics about bias against transgender youth. This comes from the National Center for Transgender Equality. 82% of trans youth feel unsafe at school. 67% have been bullied by classmates online. 64 have had their property stolen or destroyed at school, 64%. And 44% of trans youth have been physically abused at school. Now, this kind of oppression can lead to self-harm. So a Williams Institute study in a recent survey discovered that 41% of trans and gender nonconforming people that they surveyed have attempted suicide. Now, these are devastating statistics that have been largely ignored by the mainstream media, which is why it's our responsibility as storytellers and activists who are interested in representation that we tell these stories about real people who have real lives and are real struggling. So I'm going to show a clip from one of my brand new films. It's about 2 months old, called Becoming Johanna.
I always start off good at each school I go, but then issues always start popping up.
Johanna was using the girl's bathroom and they cut him, and that's why he was suspended. She was suspended.
They told me that I cannot be going to the girls' bathroom. Kara was really upset because they kept telling me that you're making a scene. They're telling me that I'm making a scene. There was no scene before they got there. The principal told me to get up or I'm gonna call security. And I was like, no, you can go fuck yourself.
The police officer called me around 3, and I was working. The police said, I have your kid here from Birmingham. And I was like so fed up of all the problems. I said, well, just keep it in there.
Because of that, I got a ticket. And I had to go to court.
Caliente. That's hot.
Do I really need it in my neck? I don't have scruffle. I'm just kidding. Whatever you call that. I've been on hormones for 2 months. It's been going good. Like, I stopped. I don't know if I have to explain all that. Do I really? Oh, well, my skin got nicer. She's not coming. My mom's not coming. She sent me to the mental hospital. Dun, dun, dun. I wouldn't tell that one because that one was severe. That was bad. That was horrible. I was there for 3 days. They were not transgender friendly there. They actually forced me to take some pills. Unless I take the pill, or they're gonna have to restrain me to take it.
I did things that the therapist told me to do as a parent.
Yeah, but you're the
Because
parent.
my
You're the
responsibility
parent.
to
Yeah,
make
it's
sure
your
you were
responsibility.
okay.
Yeah, which you should have handled.
Well, I couldn't handle it. One day I went to church and I just kneel down and pray and I talked to the Lord and I said, I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it. I was tired of all the situation. And so I think the only one who can help me is God.
Do you think your God's gonna change me?
He is the only one who knows.
Are you hoping that he changes me?
That's a good question.
It is. I want you to answer.
All my petitions to God are in my heart.
If there was an opportunity to see if I can change back, she would love that to happen.
After Johanna turned 18, she's going to be an adult. And it doesn't matter if I agree or we don't agree.
Johanna eventually gets kicked out of her house and goes into foster care. And she, as you saw, gets kicked out of school for using the bathroom of her gender identity. The good news is that she found a foster family that totally loved her and accepted her, and a school principal that took her under her wing and really helped her thrive and graduate. Now, not all kids who are transgender, and especially transgender kids of color, are as lucky as Johanna. But here's some good news from GLSEN. 75% of LGBT students in schools with an inclusive curriculum said their peers were accepting of LGBT people, compared to 39.6% of those without an inclusive curriculum, which means curriculum that is inclusive make a world of difference, a massive difference, which leads me to the final question I want to answer is, what kind of impact can projects like this have in the world? Well, the films are now done, all 4 films. They have study guides, and they're being used as curriculum in schools all over the country to do professional development for training teachers and principals and other school officials. And they're also being used in the classroom as actual curriculum for students with those study guides. So that's really exciting. But the last thing I want to finish with is to talk about the newest piece of impact that we're doing. We're just launching it now, and it's funded very generously by the Fledgling Fund. We're bringing screenings, large and small, to cities all over the country. And we're following those screenings by panels of individuals who represent the organizations and agencies that touch the lives of trans youth, like Department of Children and Family Services and foster care and the school district, the police department, someone from ACLU, and lots of other agencies. And after they've seen a film that's opened their hearts and minds and made them really sympathetic, they get to talk to all the other stakeholders in that city who are working on this issue on how they can do a better job, and most importantly, how they can do a better job interagency, so that we can have a lot more successful and positive outcomes regardless of family acceptance, like Johanna. Thank you so much.